All right, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the USD290 Board of Education meeting. It is December 14th, 2020 at 7 p.m. We'll go ahead and call this meeting to order, and we'll do a roll call here. Please say present. Linda Alderman.
Present.
Chris Cunningham.
Present.
Julie Dandrio. Present. Susan Moore.
Present.
Shanda Olmstead. She is absent. Melidia Payne.
Present.
Harold Wingert.
Not yet.
And he is absent as well. Those two may join us later virtually. So we'll go ahead and start the meeting with 5 board members present. Please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We do need to approve tonight's agenda. There is one item that we need to amend, 7.01, which is the copier contract. We need to amend that to include a possible action item if we so choose to go that way. So is there a motion to approve the amended agenda?
Madam President, I move that we approve the amended agenda. Second.
It was moved by Linda Alderman and seconded by Susan Moore that we approve the amended agenda. All in favor, please raise your hand. And that passes 5-0. We do have some consent agenda tonight, but really nothing new. Some approval of prior minutes and the usual OPA invoice. Is there a motion to approve tonight's consent agenda?
So moved.
Second.
It was moved by Chris Cunningham and seconded by Linda Alderman that we approve tonight's consent agenda. All in favor, please raise your hand. And that passes 5-0 as well. We do not have any comments from the public tonight. So first up, we have an executive session. There is a recommended action statement that needs to be read, and we do need to include our attorney, Mike Norris, as well as Dr. Cobbs, and we probably need, I would say, let's do 20 minutes if somebody would like to read the recommended action statement.
Madam President, I move that the board go into executive session for the purpose of consultation with an attorney pursuant to the exception for matters which would be deemed privileged in the attorney-client relationship under COMA, and that the board return to the open meeting at, 7:25, 7:30?
7:25.
7:25 in this room. The executive session is required to protect attorney-client privilege and the public interest. And this motion also includes having Dr. Cobbs present and Mike Norris present via internet.
Second.
It has been moved by Linda Alderman and seconded by Susan Moore that we move into executive session for the reasons read. All in favor, please raise your hand. And that passes 5-0. We will be back here at 7:25. Okay, we are back. If somebody would like to make a motion to bring us back into regular session.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor, please raise your hand. And that passes 5-0. We do need to indulge in some extra time in executive session, so if somebody would please once again read the recommended action statement for 10 additional minutes.
For how many?
10?
10?
Think that'll work?
I move that the board go into executive session for the purpose of consultation with an attorney pursuant to the exception for matters which would be deemed privileged in the attorney-client relationship under COMA, and that the board return to the open meeting at
7:40.
7:40 in this room. The executive session is required to protect attorney-client privilege and the public interest, and also Dr. Cobbs and Mike Norris be part of this meeting.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor, please raise your hand. And that passes 5-0, and we'll be back at 7:40. I think it's Harold. Okay, we are moving back into regular session here. If somebody would like to make a motion to return to regular session
So moved.
for a second.
Where's Linda? Second.
Second.
It has been moved and seconded that we return to we return to regular session. All in favor, please raise your hand. And that passes 6-0 as we have added Harold Wingert joining us virtually at this time. So we are moving on to section 6.01, which is a review of the gating criteria and quarantine changes. Dr. Cobbs?
Yep, and I left a little piece of paper somewhere back in my office, but that's all right. I'll pull from my head here. So, Dean, there should be actual gating criteria there someplace. There it is. All right. So again, this is just a recap of the things that we already know, but I have indicated that we would continue down this path at every board meeting. So you can see that. From the beginning of November, we have been fairly high in terms of our rate of positive assessment throughout the county. And you can see that our 2-week percentage still remains high, currently averaging at about 15% positive assessment rate and about 544 per 100,000 inhabitants. Being positive. You can also see the change and decrease in beds as it goes from green to yellow. Certainly across the Northeast, we're in a category that is probably, at least as KDH&E groups us, is probably not necessarily appropriate for our community, as I-35 probably travels more towards Johnson County, which is not included in this information. And I think Johnson County is having some struggles there as well. Our attendance rate is still very good. So that talks about absenteeism. It's actually our attendance rate. We don't have 97% of our students absent. We actually have about 97% of our students attending every day. Now, again, there is a caveat to all of these. That includes the students who are actually have been quarantined or asked not to attend school based upon either a positive test or an exposure, but because they are jumping on virtually, we're still counting them as a day of instruction at that point. So a couple of things that are occurring there, but that's our gating criteria. It has remained pretty steady, and again, the piece of paper that I was going to bring with me, and now I've forgotten, would show that we are still very low in terms of our student rate. And as a matter of fact, I could probably pull it up here real quick and show it. I'll just pull it up here real quick. If you bear with me for just a second. So, as of today at about 4:30, our positive rate at Lincoln was just over 0.25%, 0.27. Garfield was just under 8% at 0.9. Sunflower under 2% at 1.71. OMS at 0% and OHS at 1.52%. So again, our positive rates are not very high. We are seeing more and more exposures. Much of what we're seeing there is happening outside of the school day. Again, we're not quarantining kids. We talk about the new FAQs for quarantine here in just a bit. But our exposure rates are still pretty low. Right now, Garfield is the highest, and they've had a bit of an outbreak. But again, with some multifamily situations that puts their exposure up at just over 8%. But most of them, again, Lincoln at 1.6%, Sunflower at 4.86%, OMS at 2.67, and OHS at 3.72. This is, and remember what we're talking about with exposure here. This isn't necessarily everybody that's been exposed to COVID. It's anybody at this point in time who's choosing or been asked not to come to school because they're exhibiting some sort of symptoms or because they've had exposure. So in our list, we would include if somebody calls in and says, hey, my child has the sniffles and a headache and is having a cough, we're initially going to put them on our list to ensure that we're monitoring that until we hear otherwise. And once they're on the list, I'm going to identify them in this process so that we can kind of see the volume of students that we're talking about in terms. I will tell you that we are into November, or into December, almost the end of the year, and we've not seen flu impact us like we have in recent years. I would tell you that a large part of that is because all of our students are wearing masks, and we've not seen huge absenteeism based upon flu-like symptoms or even positive flu tests. So it's kind of a give and take, I guess, a little bit in terms of what we're doing. But we are seeing the mitigating factors that we put into place having a tremendous impact upon our students' ability to remain in school and do so in a safe environment. I also wanted to say that total, and I did this at about 10 o'clock this morning, so there were a couple more prior to this. Total from beginning of September all the way to now, we have only had 53 students across the district that tested positive. So that is not a lot out of 2,310 students. That is a rate of 2.29% total. So it's pretty low, and certainly low in comparison to the overall numbers within our county. So that's our gating criteria. I think it is important for us to recognize that they continue to change quarantine expectations. So Dean, if you pull the FAQ, quarantine expectations as more and more information comes out about what this is. So there are really two pieces to this that you really want to pay attention to. One is number 2 right there. What happens for a student who is participating in a sport in which masks are not worn? Very simply, when this happens and people have contact with somebody who has tested positive, they're going to cease that sport for 7 to 10 days. It's really no questions asked. They're going to take a number of precautions. The person with a positive case will be isolated for 10 days and must be fever and symptom free for 72 hours beyond that. And then everybody else, as long as they're asymptomatic, are able to continue to attend until they begin to show symptoms, at which time they're going to go in and get tested. So if people are asymptomatic and we're not seeing anything from there, as long as they continue to wear masks and do the things that we're supposed to do with mitigating factors, a positive test doesn't necessarily mean you're quarantining the whole team like it did before. If you remember in football and soccer season, a positive test meant that everybody on the team was quarantined. So they're going to look for some different things there. The second one that is worth noting is keep scrolling down there, Dean. Keep going, is that one right there, number 9. So how long should a staff or student quarantine if they're in close contact to a positive case? So this is again changed. It was 14 days at one point in time. What they're indicating now is that it can be 7 days, and after your 5th day, if you are tested and you can show that it's a negative test, you can return on your 7th day, continuing to monitor symptoms. Right? They again recognize that the incubation period might last for 14 days, but what they're indicating to us is that if they're not showing it yet, then it is most likely that they will not. Right? So if they come back to us after the 7th day with a negative test, again, they're going to be asked to continue to monitor symptoms. If they have any symptoms, they're going to ask them to go back to a quarantine. If they choose not to test after the 5th day, then they're going to be asked to quarantine for 10 days. And again, when they return after that 10th day, monitoring symptoms, and if we see symptoms occurring within the 10 to 14 day range, then we go back and we do the other aspects of this. So certainly some changes in how we do it. I will just tell you, our nursing staff and the county health department have been awesome. These rules, I guess, and guidelines change constantly, and we're always having conversations with KDH&E, Franklin County Health Department, certainly with us, and how we can apply them and what it means, trying to be consistent and communicate with parents. They've done an incredible job of trying to impact our schools in the best way that they can to, one, ensure that there's a safe environment for our students and staff to operate in, but also that we keep our kids in school as long as we can and for as long a duration as we can. So again, our nursing staff is working their tail off. Our administrative staff is working their tails off in contact tracing and doing those things and trying to ensure that our environments are as safe as possible. So those are the updated gating criteria and quarantine changes.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Cobbs. Next up is our Kansas High School Athletic Association appeal information. If you want to update us on what's going on with that,
Yeah,
please.
so this was in response to the Acacia Board limiting attendance at their events to nobody other than cheer and band and the other participants. So as many of you know, there was a group of people who appealed that decision, and the bylaws allow this to happen. It was then heard by a board of appeals, who then responded back to the board of directors with their recommendations. And if you watch the meeting when it occurred, I think it was like a 2.5-hour meeting simply to address who can come to games and who cannot. But in the end, they made a decision that I think is going to be beneficial to all of us, and at least get some people in the stands to watch their kids. But what it basically boils down to is that any family unit who is participating can have 2 parents or guardians in attendance, and that is the extent of it. So, and by family unit, what I mean is, if you have a student on the boys basketball team and a student on the girls basketball team and a student on the cheer team, you still only get 2 tickets, and they have to be your parents or guardians that are coming in. If you have a student in the band, you get 2 tickets. If you have a student on the dance team and the cheer team, you get 2 tickets. 2. End of story. So it is a good day that we actually get to have our parents in the stands watching their kids. It was certainly something that this board, I think, felt strongly about, that we have some spectators. But it is probably not going to be without its hardships before it's all said and done. So we'll continue to work through that. I think that goes through January 28th, and we'll see what happens on the 29th as we move forward.
And there are some schools that are choosing to be more restrictive than that, correct? I mean,
Yes.
we are going with these guidelines and welcoming that, but there are
Yep.
some districts that
There
may
are
say,
some
"Hey, you
districts that
can't."
continue to say that there will be no spectators. And it doesn't change the deeper expectations of particular counties. As an example, there are some counties that are still going to expect students to wear masks in participation. When we go to those counties, that will be the expectation for our kids. So they don't necessarily have to do it when they come to Ottawa, but what Keisha has indicated and what those counties have indicated is that home rule takes effect. So if we're going to go to Douglas County, we will have to follow the Douglas County rules in order to participate.
Thank you. All right, we are on to section 6.03, which is feedback from our remote practice days that we had last week.
All right, so this was really turned out pretty well for us. And there was a lot to be learned and a lot still to learn. But I wanted to go through some of these things and indicate that we had a pretty good response to our survey. And if we utilize that data as a reflection of the whole, we can begin to understand in greater context what we might need to do in order to have sustainability in this model, or if it's even the model that we would want to create sustainability in. So as you can see there, we had nearly 94% of our students participate as much as they could. There was another 3% or so that did a partial day. Very few of them indicated that they did not participate, and those that did not participate typically identified internet as the reason why they chose not to participate. We also knew, and we'd done surveys before, that about 97% of our students had internet service at home. But the greater question was whether or not, and that would be this one right here, whether or not the internet that they had at home was capable of supporting the environment in which they had multiple students on all day long trying to engage in a virtual learning. And what we found very quickly was that about 16 to 17% of our families indicated that they did not. If you think about that holistically in terms of the entire district, 15% of our district is a lot of kids. It's a lot of kids. So it's not that they don't necessarily have internet. It's that their internet is not going to allow them to stream and do all of the things that they needed to do in order to truly engage in the type of instruction that many of our teachers were providing. We also found out that some of our Chromebooks had some issues that created some issues for us. I said issues twice there within like 3 words. That's okay. A lot of that dealt with how the settings were operating. We found out that some of them were having some mic issues. Some of that could have been the way that the settings were set up, not necessarily a true mic issue. Some of them were having some video issues, some camera issues. Most of them had things that we can certainly fix in the long run. But it did draw attention to what happens when you have 2,300 devices in the hands of kids. Some of them aren't going to work very well, even if they were all brand new. If you remember, we put out new devices a few years ago that immediately had some issues that we had to address. So it's just part of what you deal with technology, and it's not always perfect. But we do have some issues, but for the most part, less than 10% is pretty good. So the next piece was Big Blue Button or Google Meets. And what we saw there was that the vast majority of our staff used both, and we know that happened because they did a great job of trying to pivot when Big Blue Button didn't work very well on Monday. And so as they pivoted, we still got some instruction in on that day, trying to figure out what was going on. Of course, when we asked if they had any issues with those platforms, I'm a little shocked that 23% of our families said they did not, which is great. But the vast majority of our population had issues, and we all recognize what those were, specifically with Big Blue Button. The issue with Google Meets is that Google Meets does not allow us to provide services to our special education students in the same manner that we can in Big Blue Button. And subsequently, we need to make sure that Big Blue Button is available to us to provide those services. So the next one was Tuesday better than Monday, and this was the point of doing 2 days. And you can see that 82% of our families said yes. And ultimately what that comes down to is with Dean over there, having a conversation with Big Blue Button as issues were arising, and recognizing that they had throttled down an area and created a bottleneck for us. Once they opened that up, we saw Big Blue Button work a heck of a lot better. It is not without its issues. None of them are without their issues. Even now, Zoom has its issues. Hangouts has their issues. There's always some sort of issue with technology. It's never going to work perfect on any given day, but it was certainly a heck of a lot better on Tuesday. The piece that is most concerning to me is this one. And the question asked, did the students have somebody at home to help monitor their learning? 80% of our student body did, which indicates to me that a remote learning situation is probably not sustainable for our community. It was one thing for us to ask parents to find a way to make this work for 2 days. It's another thing to ask them to do it for a month or 2 months or for the remainder of the year or into April like KCK. We create wholesale issues for our entire community by doing so. So when you partner that with the gating criteria that we've been looking at and the data that we've been looking at in terms of our students, I think, again, this board has made really good decisions about keeping our students in school, ensuring the safety of our buildings as we move through there, and identifying that the best and the safest place for our kids to be in terms of a learning environment is in person in our schools where we can maintain those environments. So certainly that is something to be learned. So we also got some information back from teachers, and this is from our elementary staff, and it's really pretty good information for us to begin to learn. So that first one that is right here. I felt knowledgeable about how to use technology for teaching and learning. We can see that the vast majority of our elementary teachers fell in sections 3 and 4, right? With some in 2, none in level 1. Right, so we're looking at this one right here. That I think goes back to the 11 days of PD that we had at the beginning of the year, and the work that Dean has provided in developing videos that teachers can have constant access to our technology staff that is in our building, to our instructional coaches, Mrs. Day and Mr. Carlson, and certainly Mrs. Peoples and Mrs. Hauer at middle school and OHS. They've done a phenomenal job of trying to help our teachers navigate these waters and ensure that we can do the things that we need to do in a remote environment. So the next one is the schedule of the teaching went perfectly. And again, you can see that it's 3 and 4. So this is not indicating that everything went perfectly in the day. What it's indicating was that the breaks that they had in the day were allowable to maneuver kids through the day. That when they could move kids on and off the system without major issues, even though we had some issues. But the vast majority of our staff felt like they could still run their day in sections very similarly to what we currently do. One of the biggest issues was this one right here. I was ready for the lag times that occurred. And you can see there's a pretty high 21 of our about 75 staff members indicated that they weren't ready for that. And again, it's a lot different in a remote environment. If you're in person, teachers have this tool belt that they can use all the time when things go wrong. So, oh, let's back up, let's do this, let's get this group going here and this group going. When you have kids on a computer screen, you have to engage all the time or you're going to lose them very quickly, and there's a lot of learning that we can still do there. And of course, the level of student engagement, and this is the one that I think indicates the greatest concern for us, is that we're only in the 2 and 3 here, which means we have very few students that are engaging at a high level. And this is coming from teachers, right? Recognizing that we don't have all of our students engaged here, that most of them are falling in this middle level. And in order for this environment to work, we've got to find a way to get those students over here. And we need them to be highly engaged. So the next piece of this is what percentage of your students were able to access remotely. And again, what you get out of it is that we only have about, if you look from here to here, you get about 85% or the same amount that said that they had ability to access the internet in an appropriate manner. That could access it at about 50% of the time, holistically, right? So again, we get our teachers indicating that our students were struggling with internet at about the same rate that our parents indicated that they were struggling with internet, which again lends credence to the notion that if we were to ever have to be in a remote environment, we could probably not count on all of our students staying at home and learning remotely. So I think it is probably worth the discussion as we move forward, that if we ever have to do this, that we as a whole and as a board recognize that we're going to have some families coming to our buildings, that we may have to open up some of our buildings as placeholders for kids to come and have access to the internet during the day. Even though we may be saying we're learning remotely, some of them might be in classrooms, some of them at the high school might be in the PAC, some of them might be in the commons at the middle school, but a place where kids can go to access the internet, because the internet is certainly creating a struggle for students to be able to work well in this environment. It may also mean that certain groups of our kids need to be in the classroom with our teachers, that we may have small groups of kids in the classroom with teachers while they continue to provide remote instruction for the rest of our group. I would say that it would not be prudent, I don't think, in terms of student achievement, for our district to simply say all students are going home for remote learning. I think that we create some real issues in ensuring the services for our kids and those who may not be able to provide services for themselves in that environment, that means that we have to open some things up that towards the end of last year when we went with the continual learning program that we didn't want to explore because of some unknowns with this virus. The things that we know that we can do now and the safety measures that we can keep in place, I think that there are certainly some avenues that we can explore to ensure that we don't ever have to have all of our students at home in a remote environment. So again, for the parents that are out there listening tonight, I appreciate their patience. I appreciate them giving us some latitude to try and experiment with these types of things so that we know what we can do and what we can't do, and how we have to get better at particular things and what steps we're going to have to take in order to get better. So I know that it was not easy for any of them, but it certainly provided some great data for our district and certainly some areas that we can begin to address moving forward. Any questions about our remote practice?
I just think that with the numbers you gave us for those individual schools and then our gating criteria that we looked at for the county, it just goes to show that our kids are safe at school.
They are. That they are.
I mean, the proof is in the pudding in the numbers.
Yep, absolutely.
Right. Thank-
Proof to the diligence and the effort,
Yeah,
too.
Yep.
our PPE protocols are working.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Cobbs. We will move on to section 6.04. Mrs. Bybee is here to present the interim assessment results. Welcome.
Well, hello. Well, first, to just remind, how do I scroll this down, Dean? Oh. Sorry. I have control, okay.
Are you guys able to open these
No,
No.
I can't do
Can
that.
you what?
None of us can open any of the attachments.
Yeah.
Oh,
I don't know why.
So we're
You
just,
can?
so you
We're
can
watching.
watch here, okay.
We'll just watch here. We're good.
Well, first, I just want to remind you that the interim assessment is different than how we look at MAP results, FastBridge results. The interim is what is considered a predictive of the state assessment. So it is something that is put out by the state, and there are 3 different interim assessments that are different each time. So when you look at data, you're really not looking at it as a growth measure, but you're looking at it to see what specific standards our students are understanding, if they're scoring it correctly or not. So if we take all 3 interim assessments, our students will have been exposed to all of the questions or content of the questions that would be on the state assessment. So it's a predictor of how the kids might do on their state assessments. And what we're trying to do is increase as many as possible of our students to be able to be at a level 3 or at a level 4. We would be happy if we had level 2, 3, and 4 and didn't have any level 1s. But ultimately, we would like as many kids as possible in the level 3 and level 4 range as far as the scoring goes for the state assessments. So how we can use these tests is that students and teachers are practicing the content, and it's how it's presented. So I know when our 5th grade teachers started this last year, they noted that they may have taught the content, but they didn't anticipate how it was presented on the state assessment or how it was presented in the question. So it's an opportunity also for them to see what kind of verbiage is used. Quite possibly there's combined skills in one question. And so as a teacher, there are multiple times that you think, oh my gosh, when you see kids doing a test, you think, oh my gosh, you guys, we've gone through this, and they're not getting it. So it's an opportunity for us to practice and see how are those questions presented, how is the content presented, how can we alter our instruction to make sure that our kids have a more rounded experience with those specific standards. So really, it's used more as a formative assessment meaning that when we get results from this assessment, we are doing some type of tweaking to our instruction, or it helps to guide our instruction. That's what a formative assessment is. The state assessment is what they call a summative assessment, which means it's at the end of the year, and it gives one test, or it gives one score for how kids have scored over the course of the year. A formative assessment means you give it, tweak some things, maybe it guides your instruction, and then you move on with that learning, and then you're tested again. So there are some PLC discussion topics that can happen with this data with our teachers. when using the interim assessments. First of all, we can look at, okay, so which questions did the students answer correctly? Which did they not answer correctly? They actually give kids partial credit, full credit, and no credit for each question. So there are opportunities with some students who get partial credit, and how they determine that is how I think they have, if they've gotten a portion of the answer correct, or they have multiple choice answers that are similar, and so they can kind of tell whether the student kind of understands the concept or fully understands the concept. So teachers can look to see if there was a question that none of our kids or very few of our kids got correct, we can look to see, okay, first of all, have we taught it yet? If we have, then we need to look at, well, why are our kids not understanding it? How was the question presented? How can we change our instruction to make sure that our kids are prepared? And if we haven't, then we talk about where is it at? Where is it in our scope and sequence, and is that an appropriate place for it to be in our scope and sequence? Then they can also, let's say, they can look by class. So each teacher gets a copy of what their students' data is, which questions their kids answer correctly, which were incorrect. Let's say there was a question that all of my students got wrong, but the teacher next to me, all of her students got that question correct. Then I can go to that teacher and say, oh my goodness, how are you teaching this? How are you instructing it? What strategies are you using? Because my kids did not get it, but your kids did. And so there's some great professional learning conversations that can happen with this data. We can also look to see what are the curriculum resources that we have available to teach those standards, and where does that happen with those resources. So there's a lot of information that we can use these interim assessments for. It also can connect to because it's individual questions that are connected to standards, it really helps us within our standards-based classrooms, because teachers can use that actually as one data point to show that kids have proficiency at that specific standard. So the other piece that they can think about is that, gosh, if my kids, even though, let's say we haven't gotten to the content, but my kids scored very well in it, so maybe I don't have to spend the amount of time that I typically would on this standard, because my kids have already shown that they were able to get that answer correctly. Then there are mini tests, and those mini tests, and teachers are using them. I can get in and see which teachers have created tests and how they're using them. But there are mini tests, and these can be given at any time, again, as a formative assessment. And these questions are all similar to the state testing format. So if a teacher has taught a specific standard or standards, they can go make a mini test, like a little quiz, with that standard, to be able to see, for kids to practice with the same kind of questioning format that they would see in either the interim or the state assessment, and that can go along with whatever specific standard they're teaching. So that really kind of gives you a overview of how different this assessment is as far as when we're looking at the data. So this district data, what this is these are, each test is about 24 or 25 questions. 7th grade, you can see, only had 22 questions. 8th grade only had 17 questions. So what this shows is just that the amount of questions that our students answered correctly aligned with the rest of the students in the state. So this isn't a percentage. It's not that we only had 8 out of 25 correct, but some of the questions on the interim assessment are harder. And so you will see on the next, when I show you all of the data, you will see that there are some of the state scores that look like, well, hey, only 25% of the kids answered it correctly. That's because it's a really difficult question. The questions that have a higher percentage for the state that students have answered correctly means it's a little bit easier question. And a state assessment is going to have a varied range of difficulty in their tests, so that way they can actually see which kids are scoring at a level 1, a level 2, 3, or 4. Does that kind of make sense? So that's what this is. This is the number of questions or standards. Each question is a standard or multiple standards that were answered correctly, that aligned with how the kids answered it across the state. Oh, and then also 6th, 7th, and 8th, they did not get their ELA completed, so that is why there are no scores for ELA for 6th, 7th, and 8th. So this is how we can put this data together, and you don't really have to this is really getting down into the weeds of it. But here you can see each standard is numbered 1 through 25, for instance, on third grade ELA. The state percent shows you that 72% of kids across the state answered standard number 1, question number 1, correctly. Our kids, we had 75% of our kids answer it correctly. So in green, the greens and yellows are what we want to see, because that means we are close to other kids, the other kids in the state, answering these questions correctly. So that can kind of tell us where, as if we're looking even at curriculum, we could look and see, okay, with third grade, man, they're doing awesome. I wonder if our scope and sequence with ELA compares or aligns with what we have already taught. And then number 12, we could look at question number 12, we can look specifically at that question, and we could say, okay, is that something we haven't addressed within our instruction up to this point? And if not, when is that happening? A lot of the reds in ELA 4th would tell us, okay, let's look specifically at those reds and ask those questions, what I had talked about before. Where are we teaching that specific standard throughout our year, and how are we teaching it? What are the strategies that we're teaching it? So that's how we can kind of use this data. And then this is math. So again, if you just kind of focus on the colors, it kind of helps you to see. I also have the other column that is number of students away from state average, because some of the questions we were very close on. Others, for instance, if you looked at math in 4th grade, question number 5, we're quite a ways away. Why is that? Why are 50% of the students across the state answering that question correctly, and we only have 21% of our kids answering that correctly? So those are some questions that we can have when we use this data specifically. And then same, this is 6th, 7th, and 8th. But this is like the most exciting data, I think. This is where teachers really can find the most use out of this data. So I just took a snapshot of one of the spreadsheets that we put together for teachers. And so they have their class. So you can see question 6, 7, 8, 9. They can see specifically what that question asked, or what our students had to answer a question for. And the C is obviously correct, the I is incorrect. We don't have any partially corrects on this. So I can look really close, or really quickly at my class, and I can see, hey, question 6, understand language use, clearest meaning, science domain, clear context. I can look and see, okay, I know what the sample questions are. I can go to those mini tests. I can look to see what are the sample questions that go along with that question. And all of my kids but that one kiddo got it correctly. So now I can pull that kiddo aside, and I can make sure that that kiddo's getting what that student needs. There's question 13. I can look and see use text features along with text to determine when events occurred. Have we not really talked about text features? What do I need to make sure that my kids are understanding? I've got 2 kids that get it, but the rest don't. So when I am teaching that skill, when I'm teaching text features, I can make sure I can, again, look at those mini tests, see how the questions are posed, because quite often I know teachers do a lot with text features. Why are they not answering this question correctly? So they can use those mini test questions to help them see how is it presented to kids, so that they can help to kind of clarify that learning to make sure we know our kids are proficient at it. Any questions about that? And then math, same way. And all of the teachers received this information so that they could use that during their PLCs. Any questions? That's it.
Will you be using any of this information to help determine what type of curriculum, say math? I know you're looking at new math.
Yes.
Will you be using some of this to help you determine
Well,
what
since
you want for math?
this really, what we would look at is if there are areas, let's say by the time we get through our third interim assessment, if there are areas that we did not do well on, we could look to see where are those standards at in this new program to ensure that it's addressed.
Thank you so much. I
Yeah, you bet.
appreciate always you presenting to us and giving us this great information. All right, we'll move on to our next item. This is We are moving on to section 7.01, which is the area which we did have an amendment to make a possible action ability for this. Mr. Grell has a recommendation for our copier contracts.
Thank you. I'd like to start off by apologizing. We don't like to bring this stuff up without a previous meeting to talk about it and then make a decision. But the proposal that Toshiba has for us does have merit, and there is a lot of cost savings here for us. It is an end-of-year deal for them. That's why it kind of came about suddenly. And previously, in my correspondence through Dr. Cobbs earlier in the week, I was under the impression that our final lease contract was the end of our lease and we were done, but we prepay our lease. So we still have an entire year on our lease. If we take no action tonight and we say, let's not do this contract, let's go out for bid, we'll go out for bid. Absolutely no problem. It'll be made even simpler by the fact that we've done an RFP for copiers before. We'll copy and paste it because it's right-sized. It's the right proposal for us. We'll get our bids in, we'll evaluate them and move forward. But the reason this makes a ton of sense for us right now, our current contract ends technically in January of 2022. So technically a year away, but 2 years, calendar years in the future. The final payment for that is due this month. And when we talk about these contracts, they have a few different numbers we talk about. The first is the face value of the contract. That's what we bid out, the face value of the contract, and then we have a charge for overages for a color print and overages for a black and white print. The face value of the contract has another charge on top of overages that's called a service escalation. And that allows Toshiba to charge us, or any lease company, to charge us up to 10% per year, year over year, to cover any weird charges that might come up or any costs of operating that might come up. We see that 10%. They say up to 10% each year. We see pretty close to 10% each year. This new contract that we have available to us through the Omnia contract is pre-negotiated with the state, and there are 0 service escalations. 0. So the face contract value is what we pay. We still have overages, but no service escalations. Now, when we have overages, we can't really fix our overages because, like a cell phone, we buy minutes. At the end of the month, they expire, and you pay for your next month's minutes. So as we have this large pool of pre-negotiated monthly prints, if we don't use them, we lose them. If we do go over, which we typically do in the school months, we pay overages. So as we get further deeper in the contract, we're paying for that annual lump of minutes split between months, and we get into June, July, we're not using them, and we're losing money. So we're always going to have overages. It's just a matter of curtailing them, bringing them back down completely. We have ways to get our color overages down because the color overages cost us a lot of money. So we're going to hit those a little harder. No matter what we do, we're going to hit those a little harder. But some more numbers, and I hate to throw numbers at you without a visual, but when we talk about our final payment this month, our face value of our contract would be $51,626 per year. This next final payment that we will pay this month is $66,680. And that's without overages, which will also be another fee on top of that. So when we talk about the $66,680 that was due this month for our final payment of this 5-year contract, we can do this no-bid Omnia contract. We'll get a brand new fleet of copiers. They'll remove the final $66,860, and our new payment will be $49,649 every single year, 5 years out. We'll still have our overages, which is a constant, but no escalations in that 5-year agreement. So a $17,000-ish immediate savings this month. And then as we talk about long-term, if we compare what we paid for this lease over time, we paid $301,565, assuming that we pay this final lease payment of $66,680. So again, $301,565. The Omnia contract, over the course of 5 years, the face value, because there's no service escalations, is $248,245. Brand new fleet, all ready to go, same overage counts just about. But it's definitely got some merit to it. If you'll remember, we've done a lot for this. If you remember our 2011 contract, we paid $804,900 face value for the contract. So we did have a lot of baked-in deals into that. Every teacher, just about, had a desktop printer. That was all baked in for that entire 5 years. That's been taken out. 2016, we removed 19 copiers from the buildings, and we saved $450,000 over the course of that 5-year lease. So once again, we're going to save us some money. We're going to be on an Omnia contract, which we've used in the past. But again, it's only if we want to. We are not in a spot where we have to sign anything. We are not in a spot where we have to say it's this or nothing. And if we want to do an RFP, we just change the date and send it back out. But what I would tell you with our RFP is that we had all of our regional people respond last time, and only 2 of them met all of our requirements. And of those 2, they both submitted 2 proposals. So we had 4 proposals to match our RFP and then bid them all against each other. And then the final thing, we didn't go with the lowest bid last time, but they were really, really close to the lowest bid, Toshiba. The reason we didn't go with the other company is because for us to end a lease with any company, no matter who it is with a copier contract, we have to pay the cost to ship the devices back. And that's about $5,000 to $6,000 depending on which vendor it is. We were within that window between the bids that were proposed. So we went with Toshiba, also based on our service history with Toshiba. They've been a great company for us, a great partner for us. And they also have one more final proposal to save us more money, is for us to move to e-faxing. So we have what's called POTS, plain old telephone service. Currently, we have, I believe, I have this written down here somewhere. We have 8 POTS lines, so 8 fax lines that are used currently. And we pay $40 per month for those lines, each one of them. $40 per month per line for 12 months just to send and receive faxes. That costs us about $3,800 a year just to have a dial tone at each copier that uses the fax machine capability. Moving to e-faxing will cost us $1,800 per year, period. And it gives us more benefits. We have staff that can then fax from their desktop without going to a machine. We also have a more granular control over the distribution of those faxes. So currently we have a fax email address that they all get access to that. There's certain granular controls that allow us to manipulate that a little more fine-tuned, who it goes to, when it goes to them. If there's someone absent or sick, we can send it down a different path. So a significant savings for faxing, and we get away from telephone lines, which are very expensive for us to maintain. Any questions on this? I have a ton of paperwork. I'd
So
love to go through it.
what I'm hearing is that you're recommending that we go ahead and renew this lease at the cost of $49,597 per year for the next 5 years. Is that correct?
And if at all possible, tack on the $1,859 for the faxing
And
for a total of $51,508.
51,508,
33.
51,058.33.
$51,508 and 33 cents per year.
Is anyone interested in making a motion and taking
Susan
some
had a
action?
question.
Yes.
I was just wondering if you include, is there like a pretty long paragraph about the education they're going to provide? Because that e-faxing and stuff is really cool, but boy, when you hire people like me, it's bad.
So the great thing about this,
Question.
It's terrible.
I fully understand, and we had the
I
discussion.
can't even believe where I've sent things, places. I
The
mean,
greatest thing about this, number one, is the user familiarity. We'll have a brand new fleet of devices. It's the generation 2 of the newest devices that we have right now. So they'll look the same. If we can get in and get out quick enough, no one will know they're different. But they'll be brand new, 0-click count copiers. With the e-faxing solution, we'll take our current address book and throw it into the copier. So OHS will have OHS's address book. Lincoln will have Lincoln's address book. Again, 0 difference to them. They won't even realize it. If a user wants to go up and fax from the machine the way they always have, they click their address book, they put the thing in and click go, they won't know anything's different whatsoever. If they choose to use the web-based version, they can. But we're going to start out, like I said, just seamless, throw it in there and go. We will push education on our own education on the e-faxing piece for those power users that do want to use that want to fax from their desktop. But again, no requirement. That's the best part about that e-faxing. This one, it is, if anyone's listening and is curious, Xmedius is the company, and they're like the Cadillac of e-faxing. So, and at a great price for us, $1,800 a year versus our $3,800 we're paying for regular phone lines.
And I guess I have a question about overages. You're not going to be charged any more for overages?
We will be charged for overages. We won't be charged for service
But not
escalations.
any more than you are now, right?
Right. I believe they're the same. Let me check that real quick before I clarify that, or before I agree with that statement. Our current overages for black and white images is 0.0033 cents, and color is 0.035 cents. And our new Omnia contract, if I find the right page, so we are 0.0035 cents for black and white and 0.035 cents for color. I believe that's the same number for color, and 0.0002 cents more for the black and white. I can check our numbers. I'm pretty sure our color is what typically gets us because they're so much more expensive at 0.035 cents per click. But yes, it is a little bit more expensive for the mono black and white color prints at 0.0035 cents per page versus 0.0033 in our current contract.
So the way all this is tracked is they can see what teachers, like the printer tracks how many of what.
Yep, so we have what's called paper cut, and that's baked into this deal as well. Paper cut allows us, it's really actually a cool technology. A teacher can go and print a document from their desktop, and within 24 hours, they can go to any copier in the entire district and retrieve that print with their badge card that they swipe to get into the buildings. Walk up to a copier, scan it, it logs you in, it says, yes, you're Dean Grell, here's a list of jobs you have printed, retrieve one, click a button, it prints out. The controls that we have in place are not super restrictive, but we have the ability to get super restrictive. We just have not yet. We can redirect prints based on time of day. Say this is only a black and white time or only color time. We're not going to do that granular. But other things that we see is that typically when people, they have this perception of the copiers in their building, that the color copiers by my room and the black and white copiers in the office. So I'm going to print this in color so I don't have to go get it too far over there. But they'll both retrieve black and white copies. So people print in color thinking they're saving their walking time, but really they're costing us more money for the print job to be in color when it didn't even need to be in color in the first place. So more user education on that side.
So this recommendation is the exact same supplier we already have, or this is,
Correct. Same supplier. It also adds
so
in.
they're willing to cut money off what they're already under contract for?
This is their, yes,
Okay.
to renew
I'm
a
just-
contract with a brand new fleet. It's in ink.
I know, just,
It's a pre-negotiated state contract. It is end of year for them, so they're pushing this deal. And I don't think they're expecting us to turn around and say yes immediately because it moved so quickly. That's why we're having this conversation to see if we can do that, because it is a great end of year deal for them. It's a great end of year, well, mostly for us.
I would tell you, Toshiba's been a great partner for us, a fabulous partner. Lyndon Jordan is always available to us. We rarely have downtime with issues and maintenance on our copiers. Then this piece also provided an avenue for us to have more toner and extra components to what we do within our buildings, which has really been the big issue, is that we've had to order toner, and so now we'll have a surplus of those things here readily available, so we can just move it and never have hardly any downtime with our machines.
We did see, if there's teachers out there watching and saying, oh, that's kind of true. It is, sorry. But there were some issues within the last couple of months with two of our buildings with replenishment, and then one that had like a major fault with a copier. And when there is a major fault, they come, they diagnose, they try to figure out what's going on, they order a part, and the part came in. So we were down a copier for a bit. This Omnia contract also provides us with a free loaner. They will deliver a free loaner device if we are out for more than 2 consecutive business days after notifying them. They'll drop it off, have it ready to go, and we have a loaner copier for the duration of that period.
and you may have said it, but what does that 10% usually run on the service fees?
Yep. So I have those each if you want
I
to
was trying to keep up with you.
scribble, if I find which paper is in front of me.
I know.
So we saw our first out of the gate charge for the copier contract was $51,633, which again, the face price of that contract was $51,626. So a few bucks more, not at all. Then we jumped to $52,645 the next year, a significant year up to $68,484.
And that's 1,000?
Yes, sorry. Yes, $68,484, and then back down to $62,120, and then this one again would be back up to $66,680 for printing and copying. And as we talk about overages, we had kind of an anomaly this year, or I guess, yeah, it would have been this year, end of last year, but end of last school year, this current year, where we had a spike in packets that went out. And that's one of those things you just roll with it, right? And that's why the contract cannot be so static and say, I'm going to spend this much money, because if we have to print more,
So
we have to print more.
we're saving that 10% in this new
That
contract.
10%'s gone entirely. Yep. So all those numbers I just spit out, we know upfront they're going to be 49,649 every single year, black and white. I shouldn't say black and white when I'm talking about copiers. In the contract, that's the number. The face value is equal to the contract value with no service escalations. And again, the only other price that we don't know about is the overages as they occur.
My big question is, there's not going to be anything disadvantageous to teachers.
It will, again, if we can get in and get out, no one would even know unless they're watching this video right
Not going
now.
to change their
They'll look the
MO or
same.
anything?
Nope.
That's most enticing because we've had a lot of change.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's pretty
It's a quick switch. Quick, maybe not the right word, because it's a lot of time to switch out a copier, probably about an hour, hour and a half, maybe even 2 hours to swap out each individual copier. So throughout the whole building, it'll take a while. The juggling act that we do with copiers when we do swap them out over the summertime is always waxed floors. And we had issues with waxed floors when we put these in, and it went over a waxed floor and marred it up, and they had to re-wax it. So we'll be in the middle of a school year, no issues there. Again, just in and out. Our last copier contract also juggled a copier as we built Sunflower at the same time. So we had Eugene Field with an extra copier. We had to have them move it, and they came and they moved it free of cost. They moved it twice actually, because we had them in storage for a little while as well. They have been an awesome company to work with. Very good to us, local support. Our service technician knows all of our staff by name, comes in and talks to them, asks them about questions, issues. Good people.
Okay. So you're not going to have someone coming to school in January going,
I just
What
want it
have
to
they
print.
done?
Yeah, I just want it to print.
Nope,
Yeah.
that's it.
and
And
not
again,
have to learn?
nothing to learn. Exact same user
Okay.
interface, just a better device that works way better. You have my word.
Okay.
That doesn't mean that we won't have people asking how to print. That might still exist, but it won't be because our copiers changed.
Okay. Because that has happened.
It has,
you know?
it has.
And you come in over Christmas break and you're ready to run some
Something's different.
stuff, and the copier is all new, and
Yep.
there's like a primal scream.
Yep.
Because you,
What changed? Absolutely.
Would anyone like to entertain a motion at this time?
I would. I'd like to make a motion that we go with the amount that you wrote down on your paper.
Okay.
I second that motion.
Okay, it has
Because I
been
don't have any
moved, it has been moved by Susan Moore and seconded by Chris Cunningham that we proceed with the contract for $51,508.33 per year for the next 5 years via the contract that Mr. Grell presented tonight. We will do a roll call vote. Linda Alderman,
yes.
Chris Cunningham,
Yes.
Julie Dandrio, yes. Susan Moore,
Yes.
Melodia Payne had to leave the meeting. Harold Wingert,
Yes.
and so that passes, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 5 to 0.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right, you all have been presented a personnel report. Is there somebody that would like to approve said report?
So moved.
Second?
All in favor, please raise your hand. And that passes 5-0 as well, and we are down to announcements.
All right. Just as a reminder, the change of our start of school year to September 9th also changed where we would fall in break, and we have one day of school next week on a Monday. So we'll get through the next 5 days here and give everybody a little bit of break, which will be good. Also remember that there's no board meeting in the fourth week. So we will not meet again until January the 11th. This will also be the last week that I submit a board update in December. So we'll get this one and we'll give everybody a break from the 11-page read and sometimes up to 14 pages. So we'll see how that goes. Maybe you'll miss it and maybe you'll just call me and say, hey, can you write me a paper?
11 pages and 6 attachments.
Yes. So also remember that our semester is not over right? So typically, this would be about the time that we're seeing the high school having some half days for final schedule. Our semester doesn't end until January 21st. January 22nd is a work day. You probably, if you have kids in the high school, got some emails today about what that final schedule will look like on, I believe, the 20th and the 21st for our students moving forward. So a lot of changes here about this time due to our changing calendar. But again, I think you heard a lot of things tonight about COVID and the way in which our staff has responded to the pandemic. Our schools are a great place for our kids. They're learning. Our teachers are providing great opportunities for them. It has been exhausting, to be honest with you, and I think this break is well-timed and probably needed for the entirety of students, staff, parents, and probably even community at this point. So again, I want to thank our staff, our administrators, all of our transportation, food service staff, everybody who has made the first half of our year go as smoothly as it has, and certainly our board for the support that they continue to provide for our staff as we move forward. And we'll see everybody in January.
All right, thank
Please
you.
keep social distancing, please keep
Yes,
safe.
yes,
as
everybody out there,
holidays, please.
continue to practice safe measures
So close
so
to
that we can
vaccine.
come back in January.
Is there a motion to adjourn tonight's meeting?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor, please raise your hand. Your old hand. There we go. And that passes 5-0.
Great.
Thank you, everybody.